Hello, this is a video intended for my professor, but open for the world. This is a video that will help explain the setup for my story, Newtown. The first thing I want to tell you is that I want my stories to always point to real world events, people, thinkers, animals, so that people who engage with my work will come out with real world and tangible knowledge. Like, I know that there are a lot of children who know every Pokemon inside and out, but because Pokemon don't exist on Earth, it's a big missed opportunity. And I contrast that to something like the Wildcrats, which talks about animals. My story is a story about stories, but it's also a story about storytellers. And the main storyteller in my story's name is Granny Nancy Griot. Granny is inspired by Maya Angelou. Why? Because Granny knows what it's like to be a caged bird. Granny's lived many lives, and she has more stories than she tells. Granny is a warrior and a poet, and you love her. And that's really Maya Angelou to me. But Granny is also inspired by Nanny of the Maroons, Queen Nanny of the Maroons, who has a lot of legends about her, but was a real world figure who was the realest decolonial figure that I know about. You know what I mean? Look her up. She's the biggest deal. Granny is also inspired by and in conversation with the work of Leanne Bedesomake Simpson. I call her LSB because I can't pronounce any word. But her work has been instrumental in guiding my thought and challenging my thought and supporting it. Granny is both a refuser or a rejecter, and simultaneously a creator, sustainer, and affirmer. And I think Leanne Simpson's work taught me that rejecting the colonial framework is only half of it. The other half of it is creating, sustaining, reaffirming, or taking part in a different framework, and they can both happen at the same time. See, Granny's stories create reality, and she was working for the protagonist, the hero, to create stories, telling stories about the protagonist over and over again, all these hero stories. But she got tired because to be a real storyteller, you also have to feel what both sides feel. And whenever the protagonist would win, she could feel somebody else lose. And so the story. Granny was the main protagonist's best friend and supporter. But eventually she got tired of that cage and decided that she was done being in a neoliberal kingdom. So she left with the help of her friend called Buttweight. Buttweight! Like, I have a terrible Jamaican accent, but just imagine a Jamaican person saying Buttweight. Buttweight is like the goddess of boundaries, but she can also stop time. So she can freeze time with the snap of her finger, actually with a thought. So she helped Granny escape by freezing time and then unfreezing Granny, and they escaped through a rabbit hole. There was nowhere else to go but the kingdom. So the forces, the feelings, the elements, and the ancestors agreed to help Granny build a new place if she promised to tell their stories. Because in the kingdom, they had stopped telling stories about the forces, feelings, elements, and ancestors, and we're now mostly telling stories only about the hero. There's one more set of peoples that I need to talk about, and they're called the values. Buttweight is one of them. The values are like these immortal beings that live on in every story, whether we talk about them or not. And the more you talk about a value, or the more your stories represent the value, the stronger the value gets. The values love attention. And they've agreed. The values don't want to leave the kingdom. They live in the kingdom, and while all the stories are happening in that story universe, the values are represented. But the values are bored a little bit, because the stories that the kingdom tell are always stories about the hero. They're always win or lose stories, and they're kind of in a loop. So they're willing to visit Newtown if Newtown has things that interest them. I'm still tweaking the relationship between Granny story and the values, but I think it's a very interesting dynamic to start talking about stories as being representatives or offerings to values that might be unnamed. Do you know what I mean? So we can ask ourselves, what values is this story promoting? Which values would want to be in this story? And this dynamic is where one of the sources of conflict comes from. Granny is constantly in a negotiation and conversation with these values, trying to lure more values into her story so that her story can have more energy and, like the energy of bravery or love or peace or whatever. She's trying to call the values into her story by telling stories that will entice them. They called this new place Newtown. So Newtown is a place where new stories can happen. And Newtown is a place that is supported by the forces, the feelings, the elements, and the ancestors. And it's animated by the storytelling of Granny. So this makes Newtown a place not only of refusal and like decoloniality, but also of possibility and a place of even a place of invitation to new, to different. It's supposed to lure you in, but she's trying to lure in these values so that she can continue to have a flourishing environment. Newtown itself is in a very special place because the kingdom was basically everywhere, and there were so many stories. The place where they hide at the nexus of stories. Newtown exists at the place where all the stories come from and nobody ever checks, like the beginning of stories. And as a result, every storyteller has access to visiting Newtown. And in addition to all the peoples of Newtown, there are these future storytellers that we call the story stormers, which is anybody with the possibility to tell stories. They visit Granny and they play with story together, and Granny kind of does like storytelling workshops with them. It's all very on the nose. It means that Granny is brainstorming with a bunch of future storytellers. Okay. And sometimes Granny does this thing where she puts out song challenges. She'll say, all right, class of storytellers, today we're going to write a song called How to Have Fun. What do you got? And she puts the challenge out. And then the audience can submit songs. And then she'll play the songs on her radio show because she's also a DJ. So how this would work is because Newtown is a musical. Every song that's presented might have multiple remixes or might have different stabs at it. Or I could put out a song challenge to the world to say, this week we're writing on this topic. Well, you got story stormers. And this is a way to try to invert media in a way to make you think that popular culture doesn't always have to be you consuming, but you creating. And Granny has two main students or two main story stormers that show up. One of them likes to play in her story, and the other one right now is kind of keeping his distance. And they're called Call-In, Crossover, and The Other Side. Call-In Crossover has the ability to call in any character from any other story. You can make a duplicate of that character and put them in the story. And The Other Side, he is able to see the other side of any argument. So the way the dynamic is set up so far is Granny is the narrator, the creator, and the DJ, the person, mixing the sources. Colin is a source of metafiction. He allows us to bring in any idea. And The Other Side is where we practice our critical thinking. Now, all of that was a setup for the song called We Make Us. And We Make Us is not only the Newtowners' anthem, but it's also like a challenge and an example of the ways Newtown make music together. One of the things that Newtowners love to do together is they love to jam. They love to freestyle. They love to flow. They like to make music together. So they'll have a song and they'll have a chorus, and then they'll invite people to just take turns dropping a verse. And whatever you drop on the verse is what you drop on the verse, and we just keep it moving. So this song is called We Make Us, and it's asking everyone to engage in a conversation about community and about relationship. I should say that I write my stories in conversation with archetypes and narrative functions influenced by the work of Joseph Campbell and also by Vladimir Prompt. And Granny is coded as being previously a helper character or a character that's known as a magical Negro or like in a video game she would be like an NPC. So this story is really about the NPCs and the unseen really taking up their own. That's all you need to know to understand where We Make Us is coming from. I'll play it for you now.